Good day, this is Dr. James Weldon, Yogadhi, speaking to you from Heavenly Mountain Community and Lodge in Boone, North Carolina. And this location is the place of the International Center of the Art of Living Foundation. And at this location, I'm sharing episodes from my book, the second book actually, that I've written. Episode 8, from the second book on my autobiography. And that is entitled Learning to Communicate Without Words. Chapter 4. This book is actually not in publication yet. You can get the earlier version of this that I wrote in an earlier book called The Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind. But there's really a lot to share here. It's really too much to put, and that old book is just too thick and too big. And besides the topic that we're talking about, the arrival of the first world teacher, and I don't speak those words lightly, deserves everything. It should be a topic of its own. So I just passed through some pretty difficult situations in the last chapter, in which my wife's life had been on the edge, literally. And if you didn't have a chance to see that, I encourage all of you to go back and listen to some of these earlier chapters. All of this is on my Facebook page, and all of these chapters will be posted also on YouTube. And so you're welcome to listen to some of those earlier chapters. And in that chapter, essentially, my wife actually just missed, I believe, being killed. And in a very, very miraculous way, the founder of the Art of Living actually appeared to have helped avoid that disaster. So we've completed our first trip to India. We're back in the United States. Now, before I begin that chapter, let me read the poem. I guess I'm a little bit of a budding poet. In this chapter, I think it's chapter 4 in that new book, Learning to Communicate Without Words. What needs to be said, this is the point, what needs to be said cannot be said. What needs to be known cannot be known. What needs to be experienced cannot be experienced. But it can be lived. It can only be lived. It can only be lived. And what I'm trying to say here is that what we're seeking is not out there. And even in here, in terms of any experience, any idea, any concept, anything, and I went through a lot of very powerful experiences, that's not it. But what we are seeking is lived within ourselves as one. So my journey to becoming an Art of Living teacher for this foundation was really an interesting ordeal. You know, at that time, there was actually no teacher training program. And most of the training programs occur on some of the advanced courses that were taught, but there's never enough time to complete the program at the courses. And in these advanced classes, they're generally a couple of days, 3 days, sometimes longer. About 2 or 3 days into every course, Sri would say, "Oh, maybe it's time to do some teacher training, huh? Who's interested?" And then a few of us would raise our hands, and he'd say, "Okay." Then the course would start, and then we'd start practicing some talks and all of that. But there was no manual, there was no instruction for all of that. And each time we'd receive some lecture training and discuss a few of the topics. Then that advanced course would end. And then on the next advanced course, the same thing would happen. Some of the very, very earliest teachers, they went to courses, and at the end of that, he would just tell them, "Okay, now you just do it." If you guys know Rashri, you'll know her story, and Philip and many of those other teachers, you can hear their stories. At that time, we actually attended a lot of these courses. In fact, for several years, aside from, making a living, living in Colorado, that's basically almost all that we do on vacations, actually for several months a year. So about 2 months a year, there'd be 3 days, so we went to a lot of those programs. And finally, I take part of what was called at that time the part 2 of the program, and I actually did it 3 times and finally complete the program. And as soon as I'm done, the training's quote over, I immediately receive a message from Sri that he has something special for me to do. And we meet, and he asked me to teach these programs now only in prisons. Prison Smart didn't exist, but you guys know, if you know that organization, tens and tens of thousands of people all over the world. Although I'd been offering a few public courses along with other teachers for a year and a half, I was a partially trained teacher, and now he says, "I'm only going into jails." And my wife joins me as well. Now, those of you that know some of my history, if you've read some of the earlier sections of this book, you can understand why I would feel really uncomfortable about jails. And by this time, I had absolutely clear memories of being in prison in Tibet and the difficult end of my life there. You can see how being in prison, being in jails would make me squirm. I don't remember the detailed reasons for that imprisonment, but I remember that sometimes later, it leads this point in the book. Suffice it to say that in the past, I must have been responsible for putting some people in prison, I guess. Again, I realized that it's not possible to escape our karma, our actions of the past. Read the last chapter. Any harm that we will do will bear fruit in the future. Yet, with the protection of an enlightened being, a spiritual master, I believe it can minimize the effects of our actions in those other lifetimes and even turn those actions into an opportunity to grow. I was given the opportunity to bring relief for many individuals languishing in prisons. And, for me, the experience is absolutely incredible. However, I can say that there's not a single time that I went into the jail and I would wake up that morning thinking, "Wow, I can't wait to go to jail." My instinctive and abiding fear, in spite of, what I'd been through, continued, was still there. And Sri knew without even asking me. We never discussed any of this. Undoubtedly, that's why, he sent me there to resolve that karma in the first place. Just as in my early years in teaching meditation, many amazing things happened there. And after about a year, Rama and I began a class that included a number of gang members in a jail. Turns out everything was already waiting for us in our hometown of Boulder. They completely accepted us. They allowed us to teach programs there. We could go several times a week and do some classes and courses. It was all well supported. And one individual that had been the head of that gang in the jail, in the prison, was called the Kingpin. And the Kingpin loves the breathing techniques we teach. And he's kind of in charge there. And as the word spreads throughout the jail, the inmates about this program, it was called the Prison Smart Program. It began to be named that. And during one class there were about 50 that attended. They were actually required to take our class. That was really cool. And during a rest period after the breathing practice called the Sudarshan Kriya, a huge wave of laughter sweeps through the room as they laid on the floor. And like an electric current, the force of happiness totally seized the group. And they're howling with laughter, just giggling and rolling around. Now, these are prisoners, understand. And that energy literally spread throughout the entire prison. Inmates from all the other cell blocks, they're joining in this riot of laughter, even though they had no idea what was going on in the other segments, in the other lockdown areas. And the prison guards, they're becoming alarmed, and they don't know what to do. And they think maybe a riot is happening. And a group of prison officers with batons in one hand, and they actually gather outside the steel door, and they're all looking through this little bitty door. They all line up, preparing to kind of open the door and rush in and stop the pandemonium. And everybody was still laying down, kind of laughing. If you've been through one of these programs, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, you don't need to do it in prison. You can take it through your local center, and it's really a lot of fun, really a lot of fun. At that moment, I suddenly stand up. Yes, Nancy, this was really cool. I stand up and I face the prison guards through this little security window, and I'm watching them. They all line up. If you've ever seen this, they all line up in a line. They all have their batons and their helmets and their mask, and and they're like, we're gonna seize everybody, and gathering to rush in and seize the inmates, jump on them right after, in the middle of this program. And just as they start to unlock the door, I raise my hand like this, and I go, stop, through the plate glass door. And the guard freezes as if he was hit by an invisible barrier. This is like a Jedi thing. It was like a Jedi thing that happened here. And he tries again to put the key in the lock, but he can't do it. He's trying to unlock the door, and he can't do it. And all of these guys, frowning with masks and everything, they're just like, whoa. And all the guards stop. They stop in their tracks, like they were hit with the force. And several minutes pass like this, and the group begins to laugh and laugh and laugh. And then after some time, the frown on every face, every officer that was looking through their mask, just imagine this. They all begin to smile. What I see happen in these moments is that an explosion of joy completely swept through the entire prison. Penetrating through perhaps years of misery that has been collecting in that space. And even the most absolutely skeptical inmate in that class told me, they would write their little stories, that the atmosphere in the entire prison for weeks was completely peaceful. I learned from teaching these years in prison is that in our souls, we are all the same. I taught in some of the most hardened facilities in the United States. There's an FCI facility near Denver where many such inmates were. This is where Timothy McVeigh and others, very famous Oklahoma City bombing terrorists. There in some of those prisons we faced murderers, rapists, hardened criminals by decades of confinement. Yet I saw beneath all of this that in their hearts they were actually tender as babies. And the motto of that that organization, the Prison Smart Foundation, is where love begins, violence ends. And my experience was that working in prisons is that if the stress is released, the violence will go down. And Sri showed me many ways during that time that the energy that he had totally poured to me in India, go back another chapter, had a life of its own. I needed to learn to let go and let everything happen on its own. And that at any moment, that energy of the enlightened mind could and would come up and somehow steer me to what had needed to be done. This is a very interesting lesson for me. Once during an advanced course in California that year, I walked up with Sri with a group of friends, and he suddenly turns to me and he said, "Now we're going to learn to communicate without words." And immediately he turns off and strides off in the distance. And instantly I feel that I absolutely must walk in the opposite direction, away from him. My arms and my legs, honestly, guys, had a life of their own. They spin me around in the other direction, and off I go in a rapid click. And I feel at that moment that I absolutely must go in that direction. Although at the moment, all I wanted to do is kind of follow behind him. What a mysterious thing is the spiritual energy of the enlightened mind and consciousness is. Think of a moment how your own body operates. The body is composed of trillions of cells. Each has its own life. At any moment, none of those cells even faintly comprehends the life that we live in the world. Yet we can, at any moment, with or without the cell's approval, in a certain sense, direct our arms and legs to move in any direction. The same is the case with the enlightened mind. Think about this. The enlightened mind is the cosmic reality that we are all part of, although we do not know it. We sense it sometimes. We don't really fully know it. And in the same way that we move our body to make decisions, if that energy is awakened in us, we could actually become the arms and legs of that bigger life and voice, if you will, carrying out our part in the cosmic plan. This is what Sri, I believe, gradually is showing me as I gradually learn to communicate without words with him, with that life. And again, don't think of being as somebody in this little space. We are trapped in this space. We are living in the confines of this space, my dear friends, in this mind, not realizing that we are absolutely united with the big ocean of existence. And the evolutionary process to go to that is absolutely the next stage in human evolution. It's absolutely natural, absolutely normal, but that's what's happening. As we returned to India, we came back again the next year. We lived several months earlier this year. And we arrived just in time for a major spiritual holiday here called Navaratri. Those of you that you know about this, it's a wonderful celebration of the energy of the female energy, Navaratri, Mother Divine. It's one of the most sacred Indian holidays. It occurs, usually in maybe October. And again, we take the long trip to India, but this time we stop several days in Singapore so we can arrive much more rested, because I made a lot of friends at Singapore during that last trip, the last year. During the last year, I've grown really a lot more sensitive to the movement of these energies. Apparently something is happening, because as soon as we arrive at the ashram, this energy grabs me. I guess that's the best way that I can say it. And I drop all my bags and I go off and I leave Rama, almost running down the main road. Those of you that know how huge that facility is, this was the old ashram, very small. No, I'm not going to see the little trees that I planted, a couple of years back now. At first I think, it's my stomach. I'm thinking that maybe I'm so hungry, but I'm drawn instead to this recently remodeled main lecture hall. This is a small hall actually on top of the hill besides the old dining room there. And this is where I spent many hours with my friends and Sri Sri during our first trip to India, where all the story of the drum, and the story of the magic asana and all of that other stuff. I head up these stairs, and as I look around, the change is absolutely astonishing. In 1 year, the jungle that is the ashram has turned into a garden. I can't believe it. Everywhere I look, the plants and trees are so carefully nurtured, they're flowering. Now it's maybe 100 times more. But the green grass is covering this once rocky hills. It's totally just rocks, just big rocks, as far as I can see. And as the sun shines on this rocky hill, the scene is absolutely beautiful. The entire hillside there, it was a garden. And of course, there are much bigger gardens now. And as I come through the main hall into the meditation hall, I see it as if for the first time. There's a new broad carved wooden door decorated with carved peacocks. I put my hand on the beautiful doorway and I peek within and see a fresh sandy floor. It was sand at that time. And this is the one that had a thin metal framed roof at that time. And when we were there, it was open. And I see a transparent ceiling they put on. And beneath the hanging ceiling is a series of paintings of clouds. I don't know if you've seen this. You saw that at this time. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I've seen this before. I think in astonishment, I've seen this before, this place. By the way, only to understand this, you actually have to go back to the earlier book. I'll try to explain it here. And I think in astonishment, actually, there's a little child asleep on the floor, curled up on a mat. A little child. And I'm drawn into that hall. I'm completely forgetting my hunger and fatigue. And I walk over and I sit beside the sleeping child, and something is familiar here. And I'm dazed by something. A memory, a place, a special time. And the young boy wakes up And he turns over to look at me. And without a word, he comes over to me and he bows. And automatically I bow back, but this is a different bow. This is a Tibetan bow. This is, the meeting of the foreheads. And our foreheads meet, halfway through. And this is the bow, the spiritual greeting of the Buddhists. And I know this very unique bow. And when we first arrived in India on our last trip, if you've heard those segments, you remember that completely by coincidence, I walk into the hotel directly from the airport and I run into the Dalai Lama. And we meet, when me and the Dalai Lama meet, we bow this way. And I'm doing it again. And after the bow, the boy closes. This is a very young child. And he goes off into a meditative state. And an electric arc of communication, I guess, if you will, passes between us. And after a few moments, being in that state, we open our eyes and he says, someday I will come to Colorado and be a guru. This is the child. And I said, what? And my mind is absolutely shaken by this. Someday I will come to Colorado, or maybe Boondale, and be a guru. This rings again in my mind with crystal clarity. Precious moments pass almost in an ocean of eternity. What happened after that, I can't say, because I actually don't know consciously myself. I closed my eyes and was drawn into samadhi as, scenes, times, and places scroll before my awareness. Like a key, it unlocks something. Something revealed by the enlightened mind comes full circle in those moments. And after a while, I open my eyes again, and the child is back down sleeping in front of me. Every pore, every hair, every molecule in my entire body thrills at the prospect. And I wonder if it really can be possible. In my first book, in one of those chapters, this very experience was described. This scene with this child. And in that at that time in the past, this is before I reconnected with Sri Sri, I had a vision that a yogi, his name was Swami Muktananda, he showed me something years before. 6 years had passed since that extraordinary vision of Swami Muktananda had made me believe many years ago that he was born again. It was years before I met Sri Sri physically again. And it was as if it happened yesterday. I saw in that memory, I found myself in that past experience. I came out of a deep sleep and I find myself Maharishi had sent me on to be with that spiritual tradition. Art of Living didn't exist at this point. This was before. But this organization, Siddha Yoga, they were very good friends of the Maharishi. Of course, that he was with him when he was young. And in that experience, I found myself, Muktananda had passed away, but I found myself in this Turiya state, facing him. And we're standing on a plane of light with darkness overhead. looking into each other's eyes. In between us, sparks and wave of energy is flowing, and something was hidden from us that I couldn't see what it was. But I know it's important. And about us, we're swirling in a fog of, kind of a foggy, misty consciousness. And as I look in Muktananda's eyes, suddenly they flare, kind of like the sun, bright, and I merge into that consciousness. And we become like one life. We're in a blissful state. And the next instant, it happens again. I'm looking into his eyes and he flares. And then a third time, I find myself looking into his eyes. This is a subtle experience, okay, that happened in a Turiya state, between waking, dreaming, and sleeping. Okay, so a third time it happens. And then a fourth time, I find myself facing him. And we look down, and I see something before us. And what I'm perceiving is really so incredible at this time. I'm actually stunned. You can know and you can not know. The inner being is actually quite wise. And the limited consciousness can't really comprehend some of this. And it just dissolves. Yet the enlightened mind that, we really are, which I am, beyond the individual mind, sees and grasps a deeper reality. In this case, this is what happened. And at this fourth time that I saw him, he looks up at me with compassion, almost in tears. And he says, "This world is so hard." And then that form just exploded into a brilliant shower, and like fireworks, and it went up and it came down in a fabulous shower, sprinkling like raindrops on the earth. And the whole world is touched by that, becoming brighter. And all these particles, kind of like a nova, there's still something left. And it's a little stream, like a shooting star, goes down and down towards the earth. And I wonder what this is. And that star, it was bright blue, spirals down and down towards the earth, into a building, into a hall, with a curved ceiling, with a half moon, and the ceiling is made transparent like glass. The structure is real. The building feels as if it's composed of divine love. And there are clouds I'm seeing below. If you remember this, if you've been there, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I'm seeing in this past experience, sleeping on the floor, a young boy, and the blue star that I'm seeing passes into the crown of the child as he sleeps. And I'm seeing the face of the boy. And I turn towards the door of that hall. Now, coming back to India, I know this place. This is the place now with the renovations. And it seems as though it's the place that was shown to me by this experience. And in that vision before us at the floor there's another spiritual master there. At the time, I had no idea who or what this was. And I feel that I've waited so long to visit this place and see the face of this being again. Now I know this face, radiant with joy and clarity. And in this past vision, the master smiles sweetly at me, and the rain begins to fall. And I understand that this is the grace. This is the love coming down on the world, if you will. Symbolic, I guess. So 6 years had passed since that time, and now I know who that master is. It is Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. And in the book, there's a better picture of that little bitty home. Can't see it. Oops. Anyway, there's a much bigger picture of this in the book, of that little bitty home. And the rain begins to pour down in that experience, literally drenching it. But as the deluge comes, he only smiles. And suddenly, as the rain is coming, I jump up. This is in the past experience. And I have an umbrella, and I put it over his head. And it's covered with the spiritual symbols. And these are the symbols of Shankaracharya. We've all wondered about him. I'm telling you, gradually all of this is being revealed. Those of you that know about this tradition, maybe you've all made your own decisions, but there's a lot we don't know. And I placed this umbrella over his head. This is in the past experience. And then this young child that I see, he jumps up and he has also an umbrella. He puts it over what does it mean? I don't know. I'm reliving this experience in the scene, back in the present moment now. Hopefully this is not too confusing for you. And over the next few days, I wonder again about these experiences and my chances to just kind of meet a young boy like that. And I'm wondering, how in the world could I validate this insight further? And I wonder if I'm supposed to play some kind of role in the life of this apparently reincarnated saint, to be with Muktananda, of course with Sri Sri, and want to make sure that these experiences are real. Let's be cautious here. It's easy to get lost in the drama of some of this, and experiences can come. What do they really mean? And there's really three options. One, I can speak with the parents of the child and see if there are anything unusual in their lives that help me validate this. Two, I wondered perhaps a Vedic astrological reading, preferably from one of the palm readings of Brighu or Shukadeva, could provide some details. I talked about that in some earlier chapters, how in Sri Sri's early childhood, such a reading was done with a specific reader, and that he had sent us there. And I wondered maybe I could go back to try to validate this. And I wondered if I could speak with Sri Sri. But really, given my past experiences with him, I actually have to assume he already knows about it. So we'll begin the next segment of this. I think we'll end here. We'll keep you on the edge of trying to discover what this is all about. At this point, I have no idea. In the episode number 9, and of course I'm doing this like 4 times a week now. All of this is available on my Facebook page, and all of the episodes will be there on YouTube. If they're not there yet, they're going to be there. And I invite you to join me in discussions. I may try to do something at about 1 o'clock here this afternoon, kind of a live session. I'm playing with a new technology called Zoom. So, but basically it turns out that all of this are resolved. There's so many, the point of this, my friends, regardless of all of this stuff, is that our life has a lot of mysteries to it. And in the same way that, we remember our life, there's a whole portion of our existence that we do not know. And we're like icebergs. We're floating through a long time, and we can only see the top little tip of that iceberg. But for every single one of us, there's a very huge backstory. And of course, there's a reason why we don't remember all of that. It's enough just to deal with today's this time's circumstances and difficulties. But ultimately, that stuff will begin to come up, if required, if it's needed, to clear. In my particular case, perhaps it's just been a part of me helping people understand that life is much deeper, bigger, and more profound than we could ever imagine. And the real point of this, and really everything, has absolutely nothing to do with me. I mean, it may surprise you to hear me say this, but there's a tremendous force of good in this world, and we are in an unbelievable time of spiritual awakening in the world, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what your tradition or background in history. That this state that we're talking about of the enlightened consciousness is the next natural state of human evolution. And that we all need to learn gradually to become connected with that. And that if we gain that capability through good knowledge practices, being in a strong community that can support some of that insight, we will be like the hands and legs of our body. We can act and do what we need to do, and to bring into this world some goodness, some love. Because ultimately, life is so short, really. And we come in like this, right? And we go out like this. And we carry the good works that we do, the merit and the attainment that we've gained. And, there's a huge celebration as part of that. So, thank you for taking the time to hear about my individual story and the early days of the coming of what I consider is the great spiritual teacher, the great consciousness, here to help us grow. And I'm part of that. And go out and do some good today. If you have a chance, just look for the opportunity. Do a random act of kindness on the Saturday. Actually, there'll be another session tomorrow, 2 of them. So we'll go. So join me again for that. And again, all these will be posted on my Facebook page and ultimately on YouTube. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you hearing the story of the enlightened consciousness and the potentiality for your life. So this is about your life. It's not about my life. It's about the potentiality for your life. And I see this work as a bridge to try to help people understand that we're here for a purpose. We're here to bring something. And we can only do that when we're living connected with the big life, whatever you choose to call that. Namaste. Check your